envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. I knew it was from my daughter. I recognized her handwriting, that precise looping cursive she'd practiced obsessively in middle school, proud of how different it looked from the other kids. Back then I thought it was charming, standing in my kitchen in Boise on a gray Tuesday morning, coffee going cold beside me. I wasn't so sure what I thought anymore. She lived in Seattle now, had for 6 years, she and her husband, a man named Preston, who wore quarter-zip sweaters to Thanksgiving and talked about his investment portfolio the way other men talked about football, had built what she called a life with intention. I'd heard that phrase so many times over the past few years that it had stopped meaning anything to me. What I understood was this: their life with intention did not include much room for a 63-year-old retired electrician from Idaho who drove a 12-year-old Ford and still had a landline. My name is Alan. I spent 31 years running wire in houses across the Treasure Valley, got my master electrician license when my daughter was in second grade, and raised her mostly alone after my wife, Marlene, passed from ovarian cancer the summer before my daughter turned 11. I am not a man who complains. Marlene wouldn't have had patience for that, and honestly, neither do I. You work, you love the people in front of you, you do the best you can with what you've got. That was how I was raised in Dillon, Montana, and that was how I raised my daughter, Stacy. I set down my coffee and opened the envelope. There were 2 pages inside, printed on paper that felt heavier than normal paper, the kind you buy specifically to make things feel more official. The first page was a letter. The second was a spreadsheet. I read the letter first. It began, "Dad, Preston and I have been doing a lot of reflecting, and we feel it's important to be transparent with you about our needs going forward." I read that sentence twice. I wasn't sure what reflecting had to do with a printed spreadsheet, but I kept going. The letter explained that Preston and Stacy were planning a milestone celebration, his 40th birthday, which was 8 months away. They had booked a venue on Bainbridge Island, a waterfront property, a catering company that specialized in what Stacy called elevated Pacific Northwest cuisine, a jazz quartet, a photographer and a videographer, transportation by private ferry charter for 40 guests. Then I turned to the spreadsheet. The total, itemized and formatted with a column for each vendor, came to $67,000. Below the total, in a separate cell that had been bolded and highlighted in yellow, was a number, $22,500, and next to it, in parentheses, father's contribution, due in full no later than 90 days prior to event date. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A truck went by outside. I looked at the spreadsheet again, thinking maybe I'd misread something, the way you reread a text message because the words don't make sense the first time. But the numbers were still there. $22,500, due in 90 days. I went back to the letter. Near the bottom, in the second to last paragraph, I found this: "We want to be upfront that the event is adults only and curated for Preston's professional and social network. The guest list has been carefully considered to reflect the atmosphere we're creating. We hope you understand." I read it again. Curated, carefully considered, atmosphere. What she was saying, in the language she'd learned somewhere between college and Seattle, was that I was not invited. She wanted $22,500 toward a party I was not invited to attend. I put the letter face down on the counter. I poured my cold coffee into the sink. I stood at the window and looked out at my backyard, the garden I'd put in the summer. Marlene died because I needed something to do with my hands. The fence I'd replaced 2 years ago. The apple tree she'd planted the year Stacy was born. The tree had good years and bad years. This past fall, it had been loaded. I thought about Stacy at 11 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner, both of us quiet in the particular way of people who have lost someone and don't quite know yet how to be loud again. I thought about driving her to Portland for her college orientation, helping her carry boxes up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, eating terrible Thai food together afterward because it was the only restaurant open near campus on a Sunday night. I thought about the job I'd picked up on weekends through most of her college years to cover what her financial aid didn't. I did not think about the spreadsheet. I was trying very hard not to think about the spreadsheet. The next morning, I called my son. His name is Dale, and he lives 40 minutes away in Meridian, works in logistics, has 2 kids I see every few weeks. He is not dramatic, and he does not take sides in things lightly, which is why I called him instead of my brother or my oldest friend Ray, who would have said something colorful and unhelpful. I read him the letter over the phone. He was quiet through most of it. When I got to the part about the guest list being curated, he made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She sent a spreadsheet, he said. Formatted, color-coded. Another silence. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said. I wanted to talk to someone who wasn't going to tell me to drive to Seattle tonight. I'm not going to tell you that. He paused. But Dad, $22,000. And change. And you're not even invited. Apparently the event is curated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you want to do? That was the right question. Not what shall I do, not what would be fair, not what would be keep the peace. What did I want to do? I appreciated my son for asking it that way. I told him I'd call him back. I spent 2 days thinking. I didn't respond to the letter. I went to work in my shop, finishing a cabinet I'd been building for a neighbor. I ate dinner. I watched the news. I slept, mostly, and I thought about my daughter, not the woman who had sent me a color-coded spreadsheet from Seattle, but the girl I'd raised. The one who used to fall asleep on the couch with her head on my arm, watching old westerns on Saturday afternoons because she said she liked the horses. The one who called me crying her first semester of college because she'd failed a chemistry exam, and I'd stayed on the phone with her for 2 hours. Not because I knew anything about chemistry, but because she needed someone on the other end of the line. Somewhere between that girl and the woman with the spreadsheet, something had shifted. I wasn't naive enough to think it had happened overnight or that Preston was entirely responsible. People become who they become through 1,000 small choices, and I'd been watching mine become someone I recognized less and less for about 4 years. The first time she'd seemed embarrassed to mention what I did for a living, at a dinner with Preston's parents in Seattle. The way she'd stopped asking about the garden, the shop, Dale's kids. The Christmas 2 years ago when she'd given me a coffee table book about architecture, and I could tell from the wrapping and the card that she put real thought into it, but thought into what I should be, not what I was. I had told myself these were small things. People get busy, life changes, you give grace. But $22,000 toward a party I wasn't invited to was not a small thing. On the 3rd day, I wrote back. I kept it short. I said I'd received her letter and reviewed the document she'd included. I said I had thought carefully about both. I said I would not be contributing to the event. I wished Preston a happy birthday. I signed it, love, Dad. I mailed it, not email, a letter, folded in an envelope stamped. 4 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. It was Stacy. She did not start with hello. Do you understand how much work went into planning this? She said. Do you have any idea what vendors cost in the Seattle area? We built the budget around contributions from both families. I let her talk. She had a lot to say. She talked about the deposit they'd already put down, about Preston's clients who were attending, about how this was a significant moment in his career and in their lives, and she had expected more from me. She said the word disappointing twice and honestly 4 times. She said that Preston's parents were contributing $30,000 and that it would be humiliating for his family's contribution to dwarf mine. I waited until she was done. Then I said, the letter said the event was curated for Preston's professional and social network and that the guest list was carefully considered. Am I on the guest list? A pause. It's a specific kind of event, she said. You'd be uncomfortable. I'd be uncomfortable at my own daughter's party. It's Preston's event and the dynamic with his clients. Stacy, I said, I'm not going to pay for a party. I'm not invited to. That's my answer. I love you. I hope the party is everything you want it to be. She hung up. I put the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a while. The apple tree was visible through the window. In March, it just looks like sticks, bare and a little ragged. but I've watched it long enough to know what it becomes. I want to be honest here because I think honesty is the only reason to tell a story like this. I was not okay. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't angry in the hot, righteous way that might feel better. I was sad in the quiet, heavy way that doesn't have a lot of places to go. I'd raised that girl. I'd sat in the dark with her after her mother died. I had spent the better part of 3 decades making sure she had what she needed, and she had looked at what I was willing to contribute to her life and decided I was the wrong kind of father to have at a party. I didn't drive to Seattle. I didn't call back. I went out to my shop and I worked on the cabinet. Over the following weeks, Stacy called twice more. The first time, she tried a different approach, calmer, more reasonable, explaining again about the deposits and how this wasn't personal, it was logistical. I listened and told her again that my answer was no. The second call was harder. She cried. She said I was being stubborn and that I was letting my pride damage our relationship. She said Marlene would have wanted us to get along. That last part landed differently than she intended. I don't think she meant it as a weapon. But I had spent 30 years making decisions about what Marlene would have wanted, and I knew, in the way you know things that are bone deep and inarguable, that my wife would not have written a color-coded spreadsheet asking her father to fund a party he was banned from attending. I told Stacy I loved her. I told her my answer hadn't changed. I told her I was always going to be her father. She said, I don't know if I can keep having this conversation. I said, then we don't have to. And that was the last time we spoke for a while. What happened over the following months, I found out gradually. Some of it from Dale, who'd heard from Stacy's college roommate who still kept in touch with people back home, and some from my neighbor Barbara, who followed Stacy on social media and mentioned things without meaning to. The party happened. The photographs on social media showed the waterfront venue lit up at night, the catering tables lined with what I assumed was elevated Pacific Northwest cuisine. Preston in a blazer laughing with men in similar blazers. Stacy looked beautiful, in a blue dress, smiling the smile she used for photographs that I had watched her practice in the mirror at age 14 and never fully trusted since. I had not sent a card. What I had done, about 6 weeks before the party, was call my attorney. His name is Bob Walsh, and he's been handling my affairs since I bought my house in 1998. I sat across from him in his office on Federal Way, and I told him what had happened. He listened without expression the way good attorneys do. I told him I wanted to update my will. I want to be clear about what I changed and why. I did not act out of spite. I acted out of clarity. There is a difference, and it matters to me. I had spent 2 years watching my daughter grow into someone who sorted people by their usefulness, and I had spent 3 months watching that process be applied to me. I didn't want to spend whatever years I have left waiting for a relationship to come back that might not come back, and I didn't want to leave behind something that rewarded behavior I didn't respect. I divided the estate 3 ways, a portion to Dale, a portion to a scholarship fund at the community college in Boise where I'd done my continuing education over the years, and a portion to the Elks Lodge building fund that Marlene had cared about when she was alive. It wasn't a vast estate. I am an electrician from Boise, not a tech executive. But it was mine, and I made decisions about it that felt true to who I am. I did not tell Stacy. That was not the point. The point, if there is one, and I think there is, was simpler than any of the details. My daughter had sent me a spreadsheet. She had assigned me a dollar value and a role, and the role was financier with no seat at the table. And I had looked at that and said, no, not because I wanted to punish her, because I knew what I was worth, and it wasn't what she'd decided. I still think about her. I think about her most mornings, if I'm being honest. I think about the girl who cried over the chemistry exam and the woman in the blue dress at the waterfront party, and I wonder which one is more real, or whether they're the same person in different lights. I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there is one. Dale asked me last month how I was doing with all of it. I told him I was okay. I told him I'd gotten a letter from Stacy, just a letter, no spreadsheet, that didn't say much, but said enough that she was thinking about things, that she missed talking to me. I haven't written back yet. I'm still deciding what I want to say, which is different from deciding what I should say, and I've learned that difference matters. Some mornings I go out to the shop before the sun is fully up, and I just sit in there for a while, not building anything, just sitting. Marlene used to say I thought better with my hands occupied, and she was right. But sometimes you need to just sit. The shop smells like sawdust and linseed oil, and just faintly like the cedar I used on a bookcase 3 winters ago, and in that smell is most of what I know about building things that last. The apple tree bloomed early this year. Might be a good year. I'm leaving the door open. I'm just not waiting in the doorway anymore. I've been thinking about that apple tree a lot lately. Marlene planted it the year Stacy was born, and for the first few years it didn't look like much, just a thin trunk and a handful of leaves that dropped too early every fall. I almost pulled it out once, but she said to leave it, that some things take longer than you expect to show you what they are. She was right about that, the way she was right about most things. I think about what happened with Stacy, and I don't feel bitterness about it anymore. What I feel is something quieter and harder to name. A kind of clarity, like when the air changes before a storm, and you can suddenly see everything farther away than you could before. What I learned from all of it comes down to something simple. The choices you make when you're not being watched are the ones that build the life you actually end up with. Stacy made choices, I made choices. Both of us will live with ours. I don't say that to be cold. I say it because I spent too many years believing that love alone was enough to hold things together, that if I stayed patient and kept the door open, everything would work itself out. And maybe it still will. I genuinely don't know. But I understand now that love without honesty is just wishful thinking, and I had been doing a lot of wishful thinking for a long time. The spreadsheet was clarifying. I'm almost grateful for it. There's something almost merciful about a moment that removes all the ambiguity and shows you exactly where you stand. Stacy put a dollar amount on my role in her life, and a column for what I owed, and a due date. And in doing that, she handed me something I hadn't known I needed: permission to see things clearly. What I did after, the phone calls, the attorney's office, none of it came from anger. It came from knowing my own worth. That's not a thing you can fake or borrow from someone else. You either know it or you don't, and if you don't, people can sense it, and they will treat you accordingly. I had let myself be treated as optional for too long because I confused keeping the peace with keeping my dignity. They are not the same thing. I think about what it takes to get to that kind of knowing. Part of it is just living long enough to have things tested. Part of it is being willing to sit with hard truths instead of explaining them away. And part of it, the part I think matters most, is being willing to act on what you know even when acting is uncomfortable and the outcome is uncertain. Dale asked me once, when all of this was still raw, whether I thought I'd done the right thing. I told him I didn't know yet. Time tells you things that the moment can't, but I knew I had done the honest thing, and in my experience, the honest thing and the right thing tend to arrive at the same place eventually, even if the road between them is longer than you'd like. I still leave the door open. I still hope. But I don't wait in the doorway anymore, and I think that's the difference between a man who has learned something and a man who hasn't.